In this lesson, we'll start to build the component that ultimately lets us see our data. And that component is called a list row, which in my project that's already built, you can see down here. And essentially, I'm showing information from the data collection that we created. So the order, the title, the length, and the description. And then there's a delete button here. So if you created a lesson, but you wanted to delete it for some reason, you can do that. Where this component will be used is on this admin dashboard. And so what this represents is one row of data in a data collection. And so every time a piece of data is added to that collection as a new row, they'll automatically appear here. So let's hop over to the project where we're building this and I'll show you how it's done. The first thing we'll do is just add a new blank page to the canvas. And we'll call this lesson row because it will represent a row of lesson data. And then in that page, add that list row element. Perfect. So notice here that this element comes with some pre-built elements, and I'm going to do a mix of things here. I'm going to remove some that we don't want. I'm going to add some of my own and modify some of the existing ones. So let's just start that. We're not going to need an image on our admin page, so we'll delete that. And then within the row content, we'll delete this detail container, which has this other image and this other description. But we do want to keep the title and the description because that's literally in our lessons data. And now let's add some more things and organize this. Let's add some containers so we can lay this out like we want. So I will add one. And since we're not really going to do anything to these containers other than put them in the row content, I'm just going to have, I want 3 of them. So I'm just going to use the duplicate button again. And we'll call one of these lesson admin elements. We'll call one to hold the delete button. And then this one's going to hold both of those. We'll call this lesson row. So let's start adding elements to the admin elements container. So the ones we're going to keep go here. Let's put the button into the button container, and then let's put those containers inside the parent container that we created. So let's add a couple of more text boxes to this container. So again, I'll just use the duplicate and rename these so that I also have, let's say I want title, order, description, and length. And we'll probably end up reordering these later, but let's just leave them for now. Now notice my 2 containers are stacked on top of each other here, and I don't want that. I want them to be essentially across from each other. So what I'm going to do is go into my lesson row container and add a few utility classes to start to make that happen. So the first thing I want is flex row, which is going to make them side by side. And then I'm going to ultimately want that button to look centered vertically. So I'm going to add a class that I created called, right there, align center vertical. And if we just take a peek into that one, it's doing align items center. And 2 more. I want space between flex start. And then I want a little padding just to give it a little breathing room in the whole thing here. So now to work on that button to make it fully work, what we'll do is, first thing is go into its container. Because these containers by default have a min height, we're going to have trouble centering that vertically. So what I'm going to do is just go inline and override that. There's a min height of I think 100 on these default containers, so I'm going to just make that 0 pixels. There we go. And then the last thing I want to do to the button before we style it is move it all the way to the right there. So I'm actually going to do that on the button itself with a margin left. So first we need to make it, we'll go inline here, make it display block so the margin works on it. And this should push it over. Great. And now let's just style our button so it looks like the delete button that we want, because we're going to actually add an action to it in this lesson. So we have that warning background color that we're going to use. Now it's red, and then we'll just, change the word on it on the properties. Let's call this in our elements list delete and give it the proper display text. Awesome. All right, now we're getting somewhere, and we're going to start connecting these things to data. So the first thing I want to do is make sure this page can show the data. And the way that happens is if I go into the page properties or the page menu up here, there's something called resonance data listeners, and I want to add one of those to this page. And it's going to execute this action group that already exists called page binding. And we want it to listen to our lessons collection. Essentially what this is doing is, so Bildr has a way for, if someone else is on my page later and I'm changing something as an admin, essentially this is going to allow the UI to update in real time with changes in data. So let's create that. Close this. And now we're going to start connecting our individual elements to fields in our data collection. So let's go into this container, and for each of these I'm going to do a very similar thing. Now instead of properties or styling, we're going to get into connecting data. So this title, I want to connect it to a record value, and I want to use from field. So it's taking it from a field in my lessons data collection, and that data field should be that title that we created. So let me just go ahead and do this 4 times. Order, from field, lessons, order. Looks good. Notice these are turning purple, so very handy to see later when you're done with your project or you're pretty far along, which elements you have connected to data, and then also could help you troubleshoot. Like if you're not seeing something in your UI, you could go look over here and hopefully see that something you expected to be purple isn't, and maybe you didn't connect that one to your data. So last one. Great. Thanks for bearing with me on that. All right, our elements are connected to our data collections. In the next lesson, we'll actually see this happen. We'll start creating our admin page. We'll have inputs where we can start entering data into our collection and then see it on the page based on this list row. But before we wrap up this one final thing I want to do is actually create an action. So what I'm going to do is create a new action group, and it's going to tie to that delete button. We'll call it delete lesson. Similar to elements, it's a good practice to make your action groups very specific to the action they're doing. I mean, this is a simple one, but sometimes you'll have more complex actions with multiple steps. So you want to make sure the description matches those steps. So let's create that group. Pretty straightforward here. I want to add an action, and should be easy to find with a search. So data permanently delete record. So this permanently deletes the current record, cannot be undone. And so Bildr will know now for each button that's on each data row, when you click that button, it's going to delete that particular data record. So now we just want to make sure it knows which data collection it's referring to. And then we want to go over to this button and connect that action, that JavaScript, to this button. And the way you do that is go to events. This is on click. You can have other events like hover and things like that, but this one is what we want. On click, delete your lesson. And now you can see that that's connected with that dot, and also on that element you have this orange action icon. So now you can see which elements are connected to data and which ones have actions on them. All right, that's it for this one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.